Let's dive into this research paper you sent us, all about life processes.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah, it looks at what makes something officially alive, compared to like a rock or a robot.
Right, right. That age-old question.
And how even things that seem totally still, like a tree just standing
Are
there.
actually buzzing with activity at the molecular level.
Exactly. So how do scientists actually decide what's alive and what's not? Is there like a checklist or something?
There is. Scientists use 5 main characteristics to define life.
5, huh? Okay, what's number 1?
Movement. Like we just talked about, even if something looks still, there's often movement happening on a tiny scale.
So even plants are considered to be moving.
Oh, absolutely. They might not be running around, but they're definitely moving. Think of a flower opening or roots growing deeper into the soil. That's all movement.
Okay, so movement's the first thing on our checklist. What's next?
Growth and development. Living things don't just stay the same, they change over time. A tiny seed can become a giant tree, and a single cell can develop into a complex organism like a human.
Right. Not like that rock in my garden that's been the same shape for years.
Exactly. Okay, the third characteristic is responsiveness to stimuli. Basically, it means reacting to changes in the environment.
So like a plant growing towards the light or us pulling our hand away from a hot stove?
Exactly. It's all about adapting and surviving.
Makes sense. What's number 4 on our list?
Reproduction, being able to create new life.
Right. Got to keep the species going. What about the 5th characteristic?
This one might be the most mind-blowing. It's the ability to maintain order and repair.
Huh. What do you mean by that?
Imagine your body as a super complex machine with trillions of parts all working together. It takes constant effort to keep everything running smoothly.
Okay, so it's not just about existing. It's about actively staying alive. Repairing damage, replacing cells, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Even when we're just relaxing, our bodies are working hard to repair damage, replace worn-out cells, and fight off anything that might harm us. It's like a never-ending construction project, keeping everything in tip-top shape.
Wow, that's pretty impressive. Okay, so we've got these 5 characteristics that define life. But how do all these different life forms actually get the energy they need to, well, do all this living? I'm guessing that's where nutrition comes in.
You got it. And the way organisms get their nutrition is incredibly diverse. It's like comparing a gourmet chef to someone who can make a meal out of just a few basic ingredients.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these different approaches.
Well, first, we have the autotrophs. Think of them as the master chefs of the natural world. They can create their own food from scratch using just sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide.
Like plants, right? Photosynthesis and all that.
Exactly. And it's not just any old meal they're whipping up, it's the foundation of pretty much all life on Earth. Through photosynthesis, plants convert sunlight into chemical energy in the form of sugars, which they use to fuel their growth and all those amazing life processes we talked about.
So plants are the ultimate self-sufficient organisms. What about us humans? We're more like takeout connoisseurs.
That's a great analogy. We heterotrophs can't just sunbathe our way to dinner. We have to get our energy from consuming other organisms, whether it's plants or other animals.
So we rely on a completely different strategy, one that involves a pretty complex digestive system to break down all those meals.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. This research paper actually goes deep into the process, tracing the journey of food as it's transformed from complex molecules into simpler ones that our bodies can actually use.
All right, let's take a trip through the human digestive system. It's always amazed me how our bodies break down food into like usable pieces. It's like a finely tuned disassembly line.
Absolutely. It all starts in the mouth. Chewing does the initial breakdown, and saliva starts the chemical process.
Right, right.
But here's the cool part. Saliva contains these amazing little helpers called enzymes.
Enzymes, I remember learning about those. Aren't they like tiny little machines that make things happen?
Exactly. Think of them as catalysts that speed up specific chemical reactions. In the mouth, we have salivary amylase, an enzyme that specifically breaks down starches into simpler sugars.
So even before we swallow, the digestive process is already underway.
Oh, yeah. Then, the food travels down the esophagus, basically a muscular tube, and lands in the stomach.
The stomach, what happens there?
Think of it as a churning chamber that mixes food with gastric juices, creating this soupy mixture called chyme.
Time. Okay.
And here's where things get intense. The stomach's gastric juices are highly acidic, strong enough to dissolve some metals.
Wow, that's a lot of power. I'm glad our stomachs have a lining to protect them.
Right, and in all that acid is another key player, pepsin, an enzyme specifically designed to break down proteins.
Okay, so the stomach is doing some serious work, both mechanically and chemically. What's next?
That partially digested food, the chyme, moves into the small intestine. It's a long, coiled tube where most of the nutrient absorption takes
The
place.
small intestine.
Yeah,
That's not working alone, right? What about the liver and pancreas?
they play super important roles. The liver produces bile, which helps break down fats.
Fats. Got it.
Think about trying to wash a greasy pan with just water. You need soap, right? Bile is like soap for fats in our digestive system.
Okay, bile helps break down fats. What about the pancreas?
It's like an enzyme factory,
Hmm.
pumping out a whole mix of digestive enzymes, each one designed to break down specific types of molecules.
So proteins, fats, carbohydrates, all that good stuff.
You got it. It's a total team effort, with the small intestine, liver, and pancreas all working together to break down food into its simplest components. But there's one more cool thing about the small intestine.
What's that?
It's lined with these finger-like projections called villi.
Villi. Okay.
They increase the surface area for absorption, creating a massive space for nutrients to enter the bloodstream.
It's like maximizing the contact between the food and our bloodstream. Super efficient.
Right. And then anything that's not absorbed moves into the large intestine where water is reabsorbed and eventually the remaining waste is, eliminated from the body.
That makes sense. So it's a wild ride from start to finish. Each organ plays its part in breaking down food and getting us the nutrients we need.
It really is. It's a testament to how incredible our bodies are.
Okay, so we've talked about how we get the nutrients, but what about turning them into energy? That's got to be important too, right?
Absolutely. That's where respiration comes in. It's like the power plant of the cell, the engine that keeps everything running.
Respiration, right.
Yeah,
It's all about breaking down glucose to release energy, isn't it?
you got it.
Mm.
Glucose is the fuel that drives cellular respiration. The ultimate goal is to produce ATP, the energy currency of the cell.
ATP. That rings a bell. So it's basically like the fuel that powers all the activities within a cell.
Exactly. Think of it like a rechargeable battery that powers all the cellular gadgets and activities. And there are actually two main types of respiration, aerobic and anaerobic.
Two types. Okay, tell me more.
Aerobic respiration is the most efficient way to generate ATP. It uses oxygen to completely break down glucose and release a bunch of energy.
And that's what we humans mostly use, right?
Yeah.
Since we need oxygen to survive.
Right. Anaerobic respiration, on the other hand, happens without oxygen. It's not as efficient, but it's crucial in certain situations.
So like a backup system, when would we use that?
Imagine you're sprinting as fast as you can. Your muscles are working so hard they can't get enough oxygen to keep up. That's when they switch to anaerobic respiration. It provides a quick burst of energy, but also produces lactic acid as a byproduct.
So that's why our muscles burn during intense exercise.
Yeah.
Lactic acid buildup.
Interesting. But once that ATP is made, how does it actually get to all the different parts of the cell that need it? That's where transportation systems come in. Just like a city needs roads and highways, multicellular organisms need a way to transport vital substances like oxygen, nutrients, and waste products.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Our research paper focuses on the human circulatory system, right? With the heart as the central pump.
It does. And the heart is a truly remarkable organ. It works nonstop to pump blood throughout our entire body.
It really is amazing. It never gets a break.
Right. It's a four-chambered muscle, and its structure is really key to how well it works. Think of it like a two-lane highway, with one lane for oxygen-rich blood and another lane for oxygen-poor blood.
That's a great way to put it. Keeping those two types of blood separate ensures that oxygen gets delivered to our tissues as efficiently as possible.
Precisely. The right side of the heart receives oxygen-poor blood from the body and pumps it to the lungs to get oxygenated. The left side receives that freshly oxygenated blood from the lungs and pumps it out to the rest of the body.
Wow, it's a beautifully coordinated system, a never-ending loop. But how did the blood actually travel throughout the body? It can't just be floating around freely, can it?
Of course not. We have this intricate network of blood vessels, arteries, veins, and capillaries that act like the roads of our circulatory system. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. They have thick walls to handle the high pressure from the heart's contractions.
And veins carry blood back to the heart.
Exactly. They have thinner walls than arteries and rely on valves to prevent backflow. Then there are the capillaries, tiny blood vessels that connect arteries and veins.
I remember learning about those. They're where the real action happens.
Right.
Right? The exchange of oxygen, nutrients, and waste products between the blood and the body's cells.
You got it. Capillaries are like the delivery trucks dropping off essential goods and picking up waste at each cell's doorstep.
I love that analogy. But what happens if there's an accident, like a leak in a blood vessel?
That's where platelets come in. They're tiny cell fragments in our blood that are like first responders.
First responders, huh?
Yeah. They rush to the scene of any damage and form a clot to stop bleeding. They're like a built-in repair crew.
That's amazing. So we've got blood, which is obviously important, but isn't there another fluid involved in transport too? Lymph, right?
You're right. Lymph bathes our tissues, collecting waste products and transporting them to the lymph nodes.
Lymph nodes. They're like checkpoints for our immune system, aren't they?
Exactly. Immune cells in the lymph nodes are constantly on the lookout for anything that might cause harm, like bacteria or viruses.
Okay, so it's a parallel network supporting the circulatory system and keeping our bodies clean. It's like a two-for-one deal. But we've talked a lot about humans. What about plants? They don't have a heart, so how do they transport fluids and nutrients?
They have a two-part vascular system that does the trick: xylem and phloem. Xylem is responsible for moving water and minerals from the roots up to the leaves.
Up. How does that work? It seems like it would take a lot of energy to move water upwards against gravity.
It does. But plants have this really cool mechanism called transpiration pull.
Transpiration pull. Okay.
As water evaporates from the leaves through tiny pores called stomata, it creates a suction force that pulls water upwards through the xylem. It's like a chain reaction, from the top of the plant all the way down to the roots.
Cool. It's like the plant is sweating, creating a vacuum that draws water upwards. That's fascinating.
That's a great way to think about it. And this transpiration pull is strong. It allows even the tallest trees to transport water to their highest branches.
Wow, that's incredible. So xylem takes care of the water and minerals. What about the sugars produced during photosynthesis? How do they get around?
That's where phloem comes in. It's the plant's sugar delivery system. It transports sugars from the leaves to all the other parts of the plant that need them.
So it's a two-way street, xylem going up, phloem going up and down. It's like a complex highway system.
Exactly. And unlike xylem, which is mostly driven by passive forces, phloem transport requires energy. It uses ATP to pump sugars, creating a pressure gradient that drives the flow.
Wow, plants are way more complex than I realized.
They really are. It's a reminder that even seemingly simple organisms have incredibly complex systems working behind the scenes.
This has been a fantastic deep dive so far. I've learned so much about how different organisms get nutrients, turn them into energy, transport vital materials.
It's amazing how much is happening inside every living thing, even if we can't see it.
Exactly. And we're just getting started. There's still so much more to explore.
Can't wait.
Me neither.
It's like a hidden world bustling with activity.
And it's amazing how all these processes we've been talking about, like nutrition and transportation, all work together.
Exactly, like a well-oiled machine. Every part is connected.
Our paper actually points that out, like how respiration and transportation are totally linked.
Oh, absolutely. You can't have one without the other. Respiration provides the energy for the heart to pump blood, and the blood transports the oxygen needed for respiration. It's a beautiful cycle.
It's a two-for-one deal. And I bet there's a similar connection between nutrition and excretion.
There is. When you break down food, you inevitably produce waste, and that waste needs to be removed.
Makes sense. It's all about taking in what we need and getting rid of the rest. Now, we've focused a lot on the human body, but our paper also highlights some incredible adaptations in plants, especially those living in, like, extreme environments, like how desert plants have evolved to handle intense heat and very little water.
Imagine surviving for centuries on just fog moisture. That's what the Welwitschia mirabilis does in the Namib Desert.
Wow, that's incredible. What other strategies do desert plants use to survive?
Some have really deep root systems that tap into underground water sources. Others have shallow, widespread roots that can quickly absorb rainwater when it does rain.
So they've adapted their roots to their environment. What about their leaves? Don't plants usually lose water through their leaves? How do desert plants deal with that?
They've gotten pretty creative. Some have thick, waxy leaves that reduce water loss. Others have small, spiny leaves to minimize their surface area.
It's like they've evolved their own ways to conserve water. Our paper also mentions a special type of photosynthesis that some desert plants use.
Right. It's called CAM photosynthesis, and it's all about timing. Most plants open their stomata during the day for photosynthesis, right? Well, CAM plants open theirs at night.
At night, why would they do that?
It's all about minimizing water loss. At night, it's cooler and more humid, so less water evaporates. These plants take in carbon dioxide at night and store it, and then during the day, they use that stored carbon dioxide for photosynthesis.
So they've shifted their whole schedule to adapt to the desert. That's so cool. Are there any downsides to that?
Well, it does slow down their growth rate. They can only photosynthesize during the day with what they've stored at night. But in a desert, survival is more important than fast growth.
That makes sense. It's a trade-off for sure. Our paper goes into lots of detail about each life process, but what does understanding all of this tell us about how life on Earth is connected?
It highlights the unity of life, even with all the diversity. From tiny bacteria to giant redwood trees, we all rely on the same basic principles: energy conversion, transport, waste removal.
It's like a universal language of life.
Exactly. And this understanding is important beyond just biology. Studying life processes can help us solve real-world problems.
That's fascinating. Can you give us some examples?
Sure. Like studying how plants transport water could lead to better ways to manage water resources. Imagine designing systems that mimic how trees draw water upwards.
That would be amazing. So by learning from nature, we can come up with new solutions. Now, our paper briefly touched on viruses and how they fit into the definition of life.
Ah, viruses. They really push the boundaries. They have some characteristics of living things, like being able to reproduce, but they lack others, like carrying out metabolic processes on their own.
So they need to hijack a host cell to do their thing, kind of like freeloaders.
That's a good way to put it. They need the host cell's machinery. And this reliance on a host is why there's debate about whether they're truly alive or not.
It's such an interesting question. They blur the lines, for sure.
They do. And despite being so unique, they play a big role in the evolution of life. They can transfer genetic material between organisms.
It's wild how these tiny things can have such a big impact. This deep dive has taken us from the tiny world of cells to whole ecosystems.
It really shows that even simple organisms are super complex, and there's still so much we don't know.
Totally. And the more we learn, the more amazing it all seems.
I agree. There's always something new to discover about the wonders of life.
Speaking of discoveries, let's go back to ATP for a second. It's the fuel that powers everything, right?
Exactly. And remember, there are two main ways to make it: aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Aerobic is the most efficient, but anaerobic is key in certain situations.
Like when we're pushing our muscles to the limit. And even though it's less efficient, anaerobic respiration is essential for life in some environments.
Right. And humans have found ways to use it, like in fermentation. That's how we make yogurt, cheese, bread.
Wow, so many applications. It's amazing how these processes affect so much.
It is. And speaking of amazing processes, our paper talks about the incredible efficiency of biological systems, particularly in transportation, like the human circulatory system.
The circulatory system is amazing. It's like a perfectly designed machine with the heart pumping blood through all those vessels.
Absolutely. And plants, with their xylem and phloem, have their own incredible transport systems, moving water and nutrients over long distances, sometimes even defying gravity.
It's amazing how life finds a way.
It is. It shows the power of evolution. Life adapts to survive and thrive in all sorts of environments.
Exactly. Now, we can't talk about life processes without mentioning genetics.
Of course, genetics is like the blueprint, the code that determines how all these processes play out.
It tells our bodies how to build proteins and carry out all the functions of life, right?
Right. And understanding how genes and the environment interact is crucial. Genes can influence our health, but our lifestyle and diet matter too.
It's not just nature or nurture, it's both working together.
Well said. And this back and forth is what drives evolution and creates the amazing diversity of life we see on Earth.
This deep dive has taken us on such a journey. From tiny cells to vast ecosystems, we've explored what makes life tick. From bacteria to plants to animals.
It's a reminder that even the simplest organisms are incredibly complex.
And there's still so much more to discover.
Exactly. It's an exciting time to be studying the wonders of life.
Absolutely. It really makes you appreciate just how incredible life is. Before we wrap up this deep dive, I want to go back to that idea of biomimicry for a second. Using nature as inspiration for solving problems. Our paper mentioned how studying plant transport systems could lead to some cool innovations, especially for managing water.
Definitely. Plants are experts at moving water around, often against gravity and over long distances.
Yeah, and using very little energy.
Exactly. Like the way trees use that transpiration pole we talked about. Researchers are looking at that to develop new water filtration and transport systems.
So we could create more efficient and sustainable ways to move water by copying nature.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to water. We can learn from all sorts of biological systems. Think about how a gecko can stick to smooth surfaces. That's inspired new types of adhesives. Or the self-healing abilities of some organisms. Scientists are trying to develop self-repairing materials based on that.
Wow, that's incredible. So many possibilities. It's like nature has a solution for everything.
It really does. It's just a matter of figuring out how to apply those solutions to our own challenges.
Well, this deep dive has been a fantastic journey. We've explored all these fundamental processes that make life possible, from getting nutrients to making energy, transporting materials, and even getting rid of waste. It's amazing how it all works together.
It really is a symphony of processes, and
Yeah,
it shows how interconnected all living things are, from the tiniest bacteria to the largest animals and plants.
I totally agree. It's given me a whole new appreciation for the complexity and beauty of the natural world.
Me too.
Before we say goodbye, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question, something to ponder. We talked about how efficiently plants can move fluids. Could we use that knowledge to develop new technologies for transporting fluids in really challenging environments, like
Hmm.
maybe even in space or in extreme temperatures?
That's a great question. It makes you think about all the possibilities that biomimicry holds. There's so much we can learn from nature, and who knows what amazing discoveries are still out there waiting for us.
It's truly an exciting time to be alive and learning about all of this. A huge thank you to you for joining us today and sharing your expertise. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to this deep dive into the wonders of life processes. We encourage you to keep exploring these fascinating concepts and send us any topics you'd like us to cover in future episodes. Until next time, keep those minds curious.